Good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of this video is to continue the series on mathematical proofs. But before we even get into that, something unbelievable has happened on this channel. Something that I keep saying it over and over and over again. I never would have thought, not in my wildest imaginations, that someone like me, who is a technological nobody, someone who had never even, I never even imagined myself doing anything like this on YouTube, and let alone speaking to a wide variety of audiences. That in the span of, since I started posting videos back in October of 2024, and it is now January, today's the 30th of January. And yesterday, the 29th of January, we've reached the milestone, and I say we because I include my audience as part of the support for this channel. We have now surpassed the 10,000 subscribers. Praise the Lord. Can you imagine that just in October, there were about, I believe there were about maybe 80, fewer than 100 subscribers on this channel. And now we are, in all that time, we have over 10,000 subscribers. I think the last time I checked was like there was about 10,300 something or so. So before I do this is going to be a math video, by the way. Those of you, you can, and again, you can always fast forward. It won't hurt your fingers. But I want to, as usual, I want to give a little bit of a message today, a short inspirational message to you all, because I feel very blessed, and it is a powerful sensation. It really, it's something that I've never, like I said, I never would have imagined. If someone would have told me a year ago, even 2 months ago, even when I started posting videos, if they would have said, on the 29th or on the 30th of January, you're going to have over 10,000 subscribers, I would have thought that they were, lying to me. I would have thought they wanted something from me. So before we get into the mathematical proofs, I hope today will be an inspirational day for you, as much as it has been for me after what happened yesterday, the 29th of January here. I've often said, a lot of people have often told me, people around me, they say, why, don't say these things. Don't be what they call controversial. Nowadays, telling the truth is controversial. It's always been to some extent. I mean, look, at the end of the day, look at what happened to Jesus Christ himself. He was crucified for being the Son of God and bringing a message of truth to the world. So no one has, human beings don't normally value things that are the truth. But for me, it would be far better for this channel not to exist at all. Walk away. If there ever came a day, any day, where the classic, timeless principles, moral, educational, spiritual, and mathematical, that I intend to defend were somehow compromised in some way. Because that would be a betrayal to you and to the God who has made this possible. The educational landscape of America is littered with formerly good colleges that defended the right principles, starting with Harvard University hundreds of years ago. And I didn't start city tutoring because America needed more tutoring necessarily. We have thousands of tutoring agencies. I never intended city tutoring to be like other tutoring services. I'm not interested in being just another tutoring service. There are guiding principles that set us apart from other tutoring agencies. And one of those principles is the commitment to truth, no matter the social price. And my desire is for this channel and for city tutoring itself. I want it to be a place where you young college students can be salvaged from the graveyards of American public education. And here in this channel and at City Tutoring, we separate truth from error. And we call out what is wrong. If something is off pitch, we can detect it. To paraphrase the great British patriot and leader Sir Winston Churchill. We can smell the stench of appeasement in the air when it's there. And this achievement is not just about numbers. It's about something far deeper. It's about commitment, discipline, and the pursuit of truth in both math and life. Math is a message of truth. Math is a truth. It is a philosophy. And it's also about, on this channel, it's also about defending values that hold steady through time. And that's one of the things I've always told my students that I love about mathematics as well. Math is forever. 100 years ago, if you were learning polynomials or linear equations, let's say 100 years ago, you would have learned the same truths, the same principles that apply to linear equations today. So it's about defending those values that hold steady. And I'm talking about other values too: hard work, integrity, and the perseverance that have guided this channel from day one. We live in a world where everything changes, but we will continue to stand firm in our beliefs. From the logical rigor of mathematics to the steadfast faith that we hold in our core values. And I know the vast majority of you uphold those values, otherwise you would have never subscribed to this channel. The vast majority of you defend the same principles. We may disagree on a few, we may squabble here and there, but I think the broad objectives, the broad fundamentals are there. So I want to thank you all for being a part of this journey. And here we don't just teach math. I've had people tell me, the enemies and people who they don't mean it in a constructive way. They always say, just stick to math. No, here we defend principles, and together we are building a community of like-minded individuals who understand and uphold and defend the importance of truth, logic, and steadfastness. We want to continue to grow. We want to continue to learn and to uphold the values that truly matter. So, as a token of my appreciation to you all, I'm going to just continue to make even more math videos on more topics, not just proofs. I've been doing this series on proofs, but I'm going to do more topics as well. There's just always so many things to do, and I also have to run my academy. So, but I'm doing my very, very best because there's a lot of young people. There's a lot of hurting. In America, here in America, and probably around the world, there's a lot of young people hurting. There's a lot of young men, and I've mentioned that before in many of my videos. There's a lot of you young men are hurting. You don't have you've had the situation in your life. You don't have a father figure at home. You don't have there's very few nowadays. There are very few men in America today who we can point to as showing true leadership. Very few men. Most men today, and I'm not talking about any particular party, but most men today, at least at the public level, are cowards. They really are. Look at, I'm going to mention again, Mark Zuckerberg, for example. One day he's defending one thing, and now the winds have changed, and he is a completely different person. You never know where you stand with such cowards and hypocrites. But here you'll always know where you stand. And you've all seen that in the comments. I pull no punches. If I believe something, I will defend it to the end. And there's a lot of men like that these days. By the way, interestingly enough, this is just kind of a side topic or an off-topic comment, but the other day I mentioned, and I'll link the video below, where I randomly mentioned the buffoon, the fool, Jim Acosta, the reporter, if we can call him that. I don't really call him a reporter. He's a propagandist. But interestingly enough, yesterday, I believe, or the day before yesterday, he's actually no longer on CNN. Now, I don't know if, I doubt very much that the heavens were listening to my statement on Jim Acosta, but what a coincidence, isn't it? What a coincidence. One less or fewer undesirable on our national networks. Anyway, here goes the proofs. All right, so we were discussing in our previous video, which I will also link down below, mathematical proofs and theorems. And those proofs and theorems, my dear students, are not like those aimless. There's a purpose to them. There's an objective to them. They're not like some of those aimless people you see today wandering about with their earbuds in, lost in the oblivion of their Instagram feeds. These theorems are always firmly anchored to a particular mathematical system. If you take, for example, the conjecture that we previously discussed when we were discussing the prime numbers, the idea didn't simply materialize out of thin air. No, it was grounded in the venerable domain, we said, of the positive integers. And similarly, when we mused about odd and even numbers, we weren't meandering aimlessly like the perpetually outraged at a latte fueled activist rally. We were squarely within the realm of integers, a very defined and clear set. Now, how often do we encounter the situation where a theorem makes no explicit reference to the system in which it is being proved? It assumes, rather graciously, that we, the scholars, the mathematicians, the students, will intuitively deduce it from the context. Much like when you have a seasoned detective reading between the lines of a well pressed letter, right? And typically this poses no issue. But the problem is, should any ambiguity arise, then you have a careful author. You should be like a careful author. And you will have to specify the system under consideration when you are dealing with, when you are trying to come up with either prove or define a mathematical principle or theorem. And this is not just being, traditional. This is essential. Nothing breeds chaos like the kind of ambiguity you'll find at some hipster poetry slam, where every word is a metaphor, and actually clarity is frowned upon. They like the confusion for some reason. There's a lot of nutcases out there. There's a lot of nutty people in the world. You want to avoid those people. And finally, when you are dealing with what we call quantified statements, those beautiful expressions we looked at, right? Where you use things like for all and there exists, you have to be especially vigilant about the system being considered. And just as you wouldn't let a group of nutty people steer your diet advice, you mustn't allow a lack of clarity to run rampant in a mathematical argument. So we have to know exactly which set or system we are referring to. Otherwise, we'll end up with an incoherent mess. So we're going to look at some statements now, and we're going to analyze them in light of what is being said. All right, so I want you to take a look at these statements that you can see here. Let's take a look at the first statement here. And of course, I assume that I'm always linking down below, but I assume that you've read or you've heard my video on the mathematical symbols that you need to know for this series. So the first statement would read as, for all x, the square root of x squared equals x. Now, let's consider that statement. And of course, this is true in the context of the positive numbers, where all is as it should be in that case. But let us not be so naive. We have to remember this is false when we include all real numbers. And it's sort of like, much like a well-meaning person who insists everyone's opinions are valid, this statement ignores the reality of negative numbers, which I dare say simply won't abide by such, we have a lot of airy-fairy reasoning these days. Now let's have a look at the second statement, where we would read it as x is an element of x squared equals 25, and x is less than 3. Now, if you're talking about positive numbers, that of course is false. It's like a good portion of the, we hear a lot about alternative facts. There are no alternative facts here. But when you open the gates here to all real numbers, suddenly the truth shines through. So as you progress and once we start learning the finer points of set notation, you will find that being precise in indicating the context of any quantified statement becomes much easier. It's almost like, when you have to be calm and you have to elegantly outline every assumption you make in math. But for now, we have to labor under the burden of writing things out with words, right? It's a little bit more tedious, but we haven't gotten into, because we're still in chapter one of this series. So once we start getting into set notation, probably next week, I hope, then we're going to start to be able to condense a lot of things. So the next thing I want to talk about is universal statements and existential statements, and then kind of give you some more proof techniques, sort of continuing what we discussed in the previous video. Now, hopefully, you can see on the screen the next two statements. You have a universal statement and you have an existential statement here. And when you prove a universal statement, you have to begin by choosing X to represent an arbitrary number, a member, we call it, from the system we're considering. So once you have your X, the task is simple. You have to show that P of X is true. Of course, the only properties we're allowed to use about X are those that apply to every member of the system. You see, if you're dealing with integers, you can't suddenly decide that X must be even. Right? That's not the way we do things. So not every integer follows those rules, and you have to respect that. The next thing is the what we call an existential statement. And that's a bit of a different beast, because here you are tasked with, you have to show that there's at least one member, X, in the system for which P of X is true. And what is the most straightforward way to do this? You just pull out a specific X that works. Sort of like sometimes you see a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, but without the theatrics. The trouble, what happens here, however, is that there's no magical formula to guarantee you'll always find the right X. It's not like you can just wish it into existence. So when the theorem's hypothesis contains a quantified statement, that can sometimes help. But more often than not, it's a matter of hacking away at both ends of the logical bridge, working, prodding, and chiseling until you finally get the ends to meet in the middle. We talked about the bridging strategy before. It's really a bit like trying to close a deal with someone who is reluctant to budge. You have to nudge, push, and sometimes even make a few concessions, for sure. It's almost like the art of the deal, to use a famous example, right? You have to understand how to make deals, all the while hoping that at least one of your moves sticks. So now we have to consider other things as well. So I want you to read the statement carefully that you see on the board. This is what we are going to actually prove. There's a lot more things to prove, but I only have time for this one today. I will be doing more. Today's Thursday, probably tomorrow. We'll see, tomorrow or Saturday. The remaining parts, because we're going to do contrapositives as well, and proof by contradiction. But for this one, I just wanted you to see quantifiers in action, and those are the little symbols. Like I said, you have to learn them. So for every epsilon greater than 0, there exists a delta greater than 0, such that if 1 minus delta is less than x and x is less than 1 plus delta, then 5 minus epsilon, and by the way, that epsilon usually, if you're not familiar with it, it means an arbitrarily small number. Right? So that what we're trying to prove is this: 5 minus an arbitrarily small number is going to be less than 2x plus 3, and that in turn will be less than 5 plus epsilon. So what exactly are we really being asked to prove? And really, if you interpret this properly, quite simply, that no matter how small an epsilon someone throws at us. And believe me, some people love to make things as difficult as possible. We can always find a delta that makes the magic happen. And so if you're a seasoned logician, you can start by letting E, right, epsilon, be an arbitrary positive number. Because if the proof is to hold universally, remember, we like universal, we like agreement. It must survive even in even the most unreasonable of choices. So what is our mission here? We're going to use this epsilon to track down a delta that plays nicely with it and has to satisfy the inequality. What is the inequality that it has to satisfy? Well, that 1 minus delta less than x, right? So if we cut to the chase, basically, we have really two inequalities here, right? We have the first one will be 1 minus delta. Let's see if I can write it out. I don't have room here. And this, of course, this implies, right, that 5 minus epsilon is going to be less than 2x plus 3. And that, of course, will be, in turn, less than 5 plus epsilon. So what is the consequence, right? We call it the consequence of this implication. This is what we want to have. So this will be true if 2 minus epsilon is less than 2x, and that has to be less than 2 plus epsilon. And of course, what follows from this, we follow it from 1 minus epsilon over 2 less than x, and then again 1 plus epsilon over 2. Right, so have a look at these statements here. And if we were trying to prove this, writing this proof formally, we'd simply state it in this way, right? That delta is equal to epsilon over 2, and then show that this choice sort of keeps everything in check. But here's the real lesson. Mathematics, much like life sometimes, rewards those who take a messy situation, impose order, and find the one perfect solution, while everyone else is still fumbling around and hoping for the best. Sometimes you have to keep things in perspective, and sometimes you got to bring order where there is chaos. So now we are going to proceed then to the actual proof, to prove that we're going to let epsilon be an arbitrary positive number, and we are going to let delta be equal to epsilon over 2. And let's see if I can put it on the board. All right, so here's the proof. Here is the proof. As you can see, when you set delta equal to epsilon over 2, we now have that in place. Every step falls seamlessly into order. The initial assumption, 1 minus delta, is less than x, and that is less, and x is less than 1 plus delta. It naturally led us to the 5 minus epsilon is less than 2x plus 3, which is less than 5 plus epsilon, precisely as required. The proof stands firm, not through blind faith, but through meticulous reasoning. It's really a testament to the beauty of structured thought. And in the grand tradition of mathematics, where precision always should triumph over ambiguity, we have once again tamed this wild frontier of logic that we are embarked upon. And now, in some situations, and by the way, I forgot to mention I should put it in here. It's just that the typing was hard. But in some text, you'll see a little square. Let's see if I can put it in somehow. I'll use red, but sometimes they will include a little square, or like this, right, shaded in black, right, in some textbooks. That is when you end a formal proof. If you are printing it in text, you should do that. It's pretty customary. So, in some situations, it is possible to prove an existential statement in an indirect way without actually producing any specific member of the system. And one of those indirect ways is called the contrapositive form of the implication. And another, it is what we call the so-called proof by contradiction, which we'll do in the next video. So in the next video, we'll do proof by contradiction, and I'll give you an example of how it's used, for example, with a continuous function. And we will prove as well the continuous function and also absolute values of some functions. So hopefully, if this video was helpful, as I always ask you, please continue to support the mission of City Tutoring. Please continue to subscribe. Continue to support the fundamental truth. This is a channel and a service. We don't just defend, it's not just tutoring, it's not transactional. It's also we are building a new movement. We are building a mentality. We want a new mentality of our young people in this country. We want to really get rid of the mediocrity and the lack of rigor that affects so many of our young people. Thank you all.